welcome back to the Universal Plywood channel. Tonight, or today, depending on where you are in the world and what time you're watching this, I hope you're not watching this at work. You should be doing work. So this is going to be part 3 of our sort of 6-part series on the idea that you can use plywood to make sort of high-end furniture. And we've decided to make a piece of furniture that everybody needs. It's going to be like an entrance hall, little cubby with hooks and what have you. While I'm busy doing all this, if you guys think of something that you want to ask or you have a comment or a question, pop that in the comment section down below. Let's get into it. Okay, so here we are at the table saw. This is a smaller table saw, but I use this table saw for this purpose almost entirely. So what you're looking at here, if you come in real close, what you'll see here is this is what they call a dado stack. Now, what that basically means is that it's a really fast way to cut grooves in things, because what you can do is you can stack one blade up with another blade with another blade, and you can actually get, instead of just a single blade, you've got like 3 or 4 blades in here, and you can actually cut a lot wider than you would with a normal blade. What that gives you is this really cool effect here. So remember I was telling you about finger joints and what they look like? Well, that's what a finger joint looks like. This is kind of like what our corners are going to look like on our workpiece. It's going to be amazing. So here is what the end result will look like, and we're going to cut our components, which are these pieces here, these nice beautiful pieces of birch ply. We're going to cut those, and we're going to get this effect on all 4 corners of our box. Okay, so let's talk a little bit of technical toffee here. How do we make one of these finger joint sleds when we want to cut finger joints? How do we do this? I mean, yes, you can go and buy a fancy one in the shops, but like I've said, I can't even tell you how many times, if you can make it yourself, why not? It's not super complicated. So I'm going to walk you through some of the do's and the don'ts, the how-tos, and a couple of insider tips on how to get the best results from a homemade finger joint sled. Let's start with the very, very basics. A finger joint sled is basically just a sled that sits in my table saw, that slides back and forth in the grooves and allows us to cut consistently accurate cuts with my dado stack. Let's say you want fingers that are sort of nice big wide ones, then you make your dado stack wider. You can even do it with a single blade if you like. You can just use a single blade, and then your finger joints are much tighter together. So it's up to you, depends on the aesthetic, what you're looking for, and how many times you want to do a cut. Obviously, the wider the dado stack, the less cuts you have to do to cover a distance, so it's obviously a little bit faster. What comprises an actual finger joint sled? Well, it's got to be one of the more simple jigs to make, because all it is a base that's got a 90-degree perpendicular fence at the back of it, and the joinery here is completely unfancy. I've just glued it. Okay, it's very simple. I've just glued it, and these wooden runners are just about the same thickness as the grooves in my table saw. So I've just parked them in here, stuck some coins underneath, stuck some glue on them, popped this down, and boom, you've got a very, very simple dado sled. I tend to make these each time because my fingers are different, and so I tend to try, and I might reuse this component and then add sort of supplementary fences in front of it. But the whole idea here is that this should be very simple and very easy to make, and you can make it adjustable, and I'll show you guys that little inside tip in a second. Right, so that's the basics. Let's talk about where it can go wrong. Obviously, every time you cut with this sled, this blade is going to eat out material from this back fence. If I now lower this blade, or I have previously cut with this setup where the back of this fence has eaten out to a higher height, in other words, where this part is higher, and then I want to cut a lower one, there's nothing supporting the back end of your material. So you can imagine what's going to happen. It's going to tear out. So let me show you that so you guys can see exactly what I'm talking about. Okay. Can you see what happened here? How the back of this has torn out. It's basically destroyed this material. So there's no clean cut here, only because it wasn't supported at the back. How do I cheat? How do I change that? How do I fix that problem? Very simple. I'm going to grab another piece to back up this piece. You know, so I want to cut this height, but I want to make sure that it's supported. So all I do now, I know that this hole is already too high. I can't rescue this hole, and I don't want to move it. So I want to put something in front of this to help rescue the situation. So I'm going to take another piece of scrap wood, any one. From that side it looks great because that's where the blade's going in, but when it comes out, it looks a bit like a destroyed piece of wood. Right, let's try it now with a backer on that will allow us to protect the back of it. Maybe you can tell the difference. I certainly can. Look how much neater that cut is compared to that cut over there. So you can see the difference. So what that means is that on the inside of my finger joints now, on the inside of the box, I won't see this scarring, this tear out. It's actually all going to fit together nice and neatly. So always remember that no matter what you're doing, especially if you're reusing a jig many times, you're going to wear out this hole, and you want to make sure that each time you do a new setup for a new set of cuts that you put a backer on this to protect the back end of your material. Okay, so let's set this up now. Here we have an indexing pin, and the thickness of this pin is the same thickness or width as the blade over here. Okay, then the distance between the side of this pin and the actual side of where the kerf is going to be is exactly the same distance again, which means that I have an even distance between every single cut. Okay, what that gives me is this fantastic finger joint effect. Right, how we set this up is, I've explained to you the distance between here and there and all that, but the height of the blade is also something to just take note of. Here we have, if we push this over right next to our blade and we put our workpiece here, what we want is we want the teeth of our saw blade to just be flush with the wood. So we want to cut just the thickness of our wood. Okay, so from here to there, we lift our blade up so that our blade teeth are flush with the thickness of our workpiece. Here we go. So remember, when you do this, this is where you got to wear your safety kit, and this is going to get quite loud. So we're going to go ahead and cut our 4 panels. We're going to cut both sides of all 4 panels so that we can join this whole thing together. Okay, stick around, here we go. Okay, so that's our first side panel done. So now you're at this point where you have reached the end of your workpiece. Now, in this instance, luckily it looks like this lines up just about exactly with where our next cut is. However, it's always a good idea to take your next piece and follow on with this. But it doesn't make any sense to take your next big piece, which is our long piece here, and put this guy up to there, because you may have been left with an odd size. You may actually been left with a half a finger. So to follow on there like that would mean that this wouldn't line up with this. So what you've got to do is take this guy and flip him around and put him up there and do your first cut from the start of this one. So you take your original piece, flip it around, and now you can take him away. Clamp this guy down here. I'm going to give myself a bit of a hand. I'm going to clamp that on there with a clamp just to help me hold it. Keep it up against my panel. And I'm going to put this guy out of the way. We do our first cut in that position, and then we move along and carry on exactly as we were. So all we have to do now is do a dry assembly, make sure everything fits. If there's any adjustments to be made, we'll make them now. Okay, so we've done our sample, so we know that this is accurate. We don't have to worry about adjusting anything. So now all we've got to do is pop this together, make sure it all fits nicely, and then we can plan where we're going to put our grooves for our backs and for our doors. So let's go back to the assembly table and do a dry assembly.